I hadn't slept in 2 days, maybe 3, it was hard to tell. The hospital lights didn't change with time. They stayed dim and sterile, blinking like tiny electric heartbeats from the machines lined up around my father's bed. Every so often one would beep a little louder than the rest, and I'd look up in panic, only to find it was just another adjustment. Oxygen pulse, respiration stubborn numbers that never quite held steady. I sat beside him, elbow resting on the vinyl arm of the recliner someone had dragged in from the hallway. My fingers lightly touched his hand, careful not to dislodge the IV taped across the blue of his paper-thin skin. His nails were still stained with sawdust even now. I guess some things don't scrub out easy. He hadn't spoken since yesterday morning, just a single breathy whisper. "You're still here?" I had nodded, but he'd already fallen back asleep, or whatever this was. The nurses called it resting, but they also said comfort care, and that word comfort felt like a lie in this place. The only sound besides the machines was the faint shuffle of soft-soled shoes in the hallway and the buzz of a vending machine down the corridor. Outside, I imagined the world was waking up, getting coffee, checking phones. Here, time wasn't moving. That's when my phone buzzed. The vibration against the metal bedside table made me jump. I fumbled to grab it, heart stuttering, as if this would finally be the text from my sister, the one I'd been half dreading, half hoping for. Celine. A video call. I stared at the screen. Her contact photo hadn't changed, flawless makeup, a champagne flute in one hand, eyes glowing like she'd just won something. I swiped to answer. The image flickered to life, and there she was on a balcony somewhere bright, with limestone walls behind her and blue sky above. She wore a silk robe hair in effortless waves. I could hear birdsong and the clink of cutlery nearby. "Eloan," she said, and I could already hear it, that clipped, distant tone. "How's Dad?" "He's not good." My voice cracked. "They think, maybe tonight." She nodded once. "We're in Florence. Damien's meeting with someone from LVMH this afternoon, but I'll try to call later. She glanced off screen. Then the camera shifted. Damien leaned into frame. His sunglasses were perched on his head shirt, unbuttoned, just enough to show off whatever necklace he wore now. He looked freshly tanned. "Look," he said, smirking. "I told Selene don't get dragged down by small-town guilt. He's just a waste of time at this point." I blinked. Damien kept going. "He didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for your wedding, remember? Always judging. That family never thought she was good enough. Let him go." And then, with the ease of someone folding a napkin, "Your family's beneath you, babe. You've moved on." I didn't say anything. I just lowered the phone until it was face down on the chair next to mine. My hand rested back on my father's. His chest rose and fell under the pressure of the oxygen, each breath a quiet labor. "My name's Eloan Maris," I whispered aloud, as if to remind myself I still had one. "I'm 29, youngest daughter of Richard Maris, who built half the homes in this town with nothing more than cedar patience and calloused hands. I'm an art teacher. Not flashy, not wealthy, but I stayed. That's who I am." I looked at my father's face, lined, soft, familiar. This man raised us with grit and good intentions. He made my lunch every day until I was 12. He fixed my first car with bungee cords and borrowed parts. He never said "I love you" easily, but when he did it, held. Celine had been the opposite from the start. Even when we were kids, she wore perfume to middle school and talked about marrying someone rich before she'd even kissed a boy. She once told me our family smelled like drywall and cheap pasta. She wasn't trying to be cruel, she was just honest in a way that scraped. But still, I'd held out some hope that she'd come, that she'd walk through the door with a moment of grace, sit by his bed, maybe tell him she remembered the time he built her a dollhouse for Christmas, or that she still had the bracelet he gave her at graduation. Instead, I got Florence, a silk robe, and a man who said my family was beneath us. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old utility knife Dad had given me when I turned 16. The handle was worn smooth. I used to keep it in my desk at school to open supply boxes, but now I kept it close like a relic. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I whispered into the quiet, "I'm still here, Dad. I'm staying." And in the soft glow of machines and grief, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't about loss anymore. This was about remembering. and eventually reclaiming, even if I had to do it alone. The last time I heard my sister's voice, it was in a voicemail left 2 weeks ago. I hadn't saved it, but the sound of it stuck to the edges of my mind like dust. You can't quite wipe clean. Hey, Elle. Just got your message. Things are a little packed right now. We're thinking maybe next month, depending on Damien's board meetings. I'll see if we can swing a visit. Just hang in there. Okay. She ended the message with a breezy hum, like she couldn't even be bothered to say goodbye. Like we were talking about a calendar mix-up, not the fact that our father couldn't sit up without help anymore. He'd been in and out of the hospital since spring, but 2 weeks ago, the doctor had said it plainly. It's time to call family. I'd called her that afternoon. Next month. I stirred the soup slowly, making sure the spoon wouldn't rattle against the side of the bowl. The nurses told me he hadn't eaten much all day and his weight was down again. I sat on the edge of the bed, cradling the bowl in one hand and holding the spoon like I was feeding a baby bird. His lips barely moved, but when I touched the spoon to them, he took a little. His throat bobbed with the effort. You used to hate butternut squash, I said softly. Said it was pretend soup. But you liked the rosemary. He didn't answer. His eyes were closed. Still, I kept feeding him one slow spoonful at a time, like routine was stronger than time. He flinched once when a nurse dropped a tray in the hallway, but his fingers didn't move. He didn't open his eyes. I dabbed his mouth with a napkin, then placed the bowl on the tray table. The nurse, Kelly, I think, poked her head in. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with that gentle tone some nurses are just born with. Do you need anything, hon? I shook my head. You've been here all night, she said kindly. You want a break? I can sit with him while you grab coffee. I'm okay, I murmured, barely above a whisper. She nodded but hesitated. You know he's holding on. They do that sometimes. For someone to come back, or say goodbye. I didn't say what I wanted to, that if he was waiting for Celine, he'd be waiting a long damn time. Instead, I adjusted the blanket over his legs and smoothed the crease where it had folded awkwardly by his ankle. Kelly offered a soft smile and closed the door behind her. I sat back in the chair, arms wrapped around myself. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and that strange artificial floral scent hospitals love so much, like someone tried to cover up the truth of things with a plug-in air freshener. The silence between me and my sister used to feel temporary, circumstantial. The kind of thing you could fix with a long phone call or a glass of wine and some awkward laughs. But now it felt deliberate, cold, like a wall she'd helped build brick by careful brick. Celine hadn't always been cruel, not exactly, but she'd mastered the art of absence, being unavailable, unreachable, always busy or on the move. She called when it was convenient. She sent birthday gifts that still had the receipt tucked inside. Once she mailed our dad a gourmet fruit basket from a catalog that didn't deliver to our zip code. He'd laughed about it, called it thoughtful. But I knew it hurt him that she hadn't remembered where we lived. When I told him that last year, he just said, "It's not forgetting kiddo, it's choosing not to carry it with her." That's what she did. She dropped pieces of this family like they were too heavy to pack. I glanced at my phone again. Nothing new. I thought of the night I called, her voice shaking as I stood in the ER hallway, waiting on scans that would tell us how far the disease had spread. I'd asked her, begged her, really to come home, just for a day, just to see him. She said she'd talk to Damien, see what was realistic. That was 2 weeks ago. The only thing that had shown up since was that message. Next month. Now I stared at the monitor beside Dad's bed, watched the jagged green line pulse slowly like a signal from a sinking ship. I didn't know if he still knew I was here. I didn't know if it mattered, but I stayed. And even in the silence, I knew that counted for something. I used to think sisters came from the same soil, that even if you grew in different directions, you still shared something deep underground, a set of roots, a rhythm, a kind of quiet tether. But Celine and I had always felt more like two separate trees on opposite ends of the same property. She grew toward the skyline. I leaned inward toward shade and stillness. When we were kids, it showed in the smallest things. Celine's room was covered in posters of movie stars and black and white photos of Paris she'd torn from magazines. Mine was full of half-finished canvases, hand-me-down books and clippings of National Geographic articles pinned beside sketches of owls and seascapes. She'd sneak out through the back door in a leather jacket that didn't belong to her, all perfume and lip gloss and the kind of confidence that made boys dumb and girls quiet. I'd sit on the porch with Dad sipping root beer from bottles and watching Nova reruns on the old portable TV he kept in the garage. I never minded that she was different, not at first. Celine always made the house feel bigger, louder, yes, but charged with a kind of wildness I didn't have. Sometimes I'd envy it the way people turned when she walked into a room like she'd already decided they should. But even back then, I knew she was trying to outrun something. A fear, maybe, or a version of herself that felt too ordinary. Dad noticed too, though he rarely said much unless she pushed him. One night when I was maybe 10 and she was 17, we were all in the living room. I was curled up on the floor with a sketch pad drawing a fox from memory. Celine was standing by the door yelling about curfews and how unfair it was that she couldn't go to a party out by the lake. "It's not even that far," she snapped, flipping her car keys in one hand like they were proof of maturity. Dad sat in his armchair. One leg crossed a mug of chamomile tea cooling on the table beside him. He looked tired, the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes. "You don't need to impress boys with trust funds to feel like you matter, Celine." She rolled her eyes so hard, it looked like they might stay that way. "It's not about them, Dad. It's about where I'm going. I'm not staying in this town. I want something bigger. There's nothing wrong with wanting more," he said calmly. "But don't pretend your worth depends on marble countertops or country clubs." "Easy for you to say," she snapped. "You never wanted more than sawdust and loyalty. That's not me." Dad's voice was steady, but I remember the way he folded his hands in his lap, careful and deliberate. "Money can't replace roots, Celine." She stood there for a beat, jaw clenched. Then she laughed, sharp and joyless. "Roots don't buy rooftop dinners in New York." The door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass. I flinched. Dad didn't move. Later that night, I found him in the garage sanding down an old cedar shelf. He didn't say anything for a long time. I just sat nearby and listened to the steady rasp of sandpaper against wood, the only sound in the room. Eventually, he spoke soft, more to himself than me. "She's got fire. I just hope she learns to point it in the right direction." I think that was the night I stopped believing she'd come back. She left for college the next year, a full scholarship to an expensive school upstate. After that, it was internships in Boston, summers in Europe, whirlwind stories that always seemed rehearsed and a little too glossy. She sent postcards. For a while, Venice is dreamy, Damien says hi, or saw Banksy in London and thought of your sketches. But they came fewer and farther between until one day they just didn't anymore. She came back for our mother's funeral, but only for the service. Wore black silk, cried once, then left before dinner. I remember the way she hugged Dad, quick and dry-eyed. He looked at her like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. But I still remember the night before she left for college. I was sitting in her room helping her fold the last of her clothes into a designer suitcase she'd borrowed from her roommate. She paused and looked at me. "You'll be okay here, won't you?" I nodded. "Dad and I always are." She smirked. "You're too soft, Elle. This town is going to swallow you whole," but I didn't feel swallowed. I felt grounded. Now, as I sat beside my father's bed, the memory settled over me like a quilt stitched from too many years of silence. Maybe we had come from the same soil once. But she'd uprooted herself a long time ago, and I had stayed. It was a Tuesday night in late October, the kind where the wind carried the first hints of frost, and the leaves looked tired of holding on. The kind of evening you'd want something warm on the stove and a seat at a table that didn't expect performance. But that night, our table expected everything. Celine had called the week before, her voice clipped and breathless. "We'll be up in Maine for a few days. Damien wants to see the foliage, and there's some winery he's obsessed with. I thought we could do dinner, Tuesday maybe." She made it sound like a favor, like we were the tourist attraction. Dad said yes, of course. He spent the afternoon chopping vegetables and checking the timer on the roast every 10 minutes like it was a security system. I made sweet tea the way Mom used to, extra lemon, extra sugar, served cold in mason jars. I even pulled out the good dishes, the set with the blue ivy around the rim that we only used at Easter. They arrived 23 minutes late. Celine wore a camel-colored coat cinched at the waist, a silk scarf tied with effortless flair. Damien trailed behind her phone, still in hand, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my car. He looked around the house like it was a set in a student film, low-budget, nostalgic, vaguely offensive. When they stepped inside, Celine gave Dad a 2-second hug and me a kiss on the cheek that didn't land. Damien didn't bother with small talk. He glanced at the framed cross-stitch above the mantel and gave a smirk that didn't belong in polite company. This place, he said, is exactly what I pictured. It's quaint. Dad led them to the dining room without comment. He pulled out chairs, gestured toward the roast. "Hope you're hungry." Took this one from Mom's old recipe book. Celine smiled, but it was the strained kind she used in social photos. "Smells hearty." We sat. Damien eyed the pitcher of sweet tea in the center of the table as if it were a specimen. "Is that iced tea?" he asked. "Sweet tea," I said, pouring it into his glass. He took a sip, recoiled slightly, and chuckled. "Wow, that is unapologetic, like drinking syrup." He pushed the glass aside. "Charming." Celine laughed that tight little laugh she'd picked up in Boston. "You'll have to forgive Damien. He's used to, a different kind of palate." Dad's jaw tightened. He didn't speak, but I watched him reach for his water instead of the tea. His hand trembled just slightly as he lifted the glass. "So Ello and Damien said, slicing into his roast without waiting. Still teaching? That little school, what's it called? Wickham Elementary," I said. "Right." He nodded like it was adorable. "Must be nice to do something stable." I gave a smile I didn't feel. "It is." Celine jumped in before I could say more. "Ellowen's always been the rooted one. Grounded, small town, steady." I glanced at her, unsure if it was meant as praise or insult. Damien leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "Honestly, I don't know how you do it. This whole pace, it's like time stopped here. I mean that in a good way, of course. Nostalgia is trending." Dad put down his fork. "Time didn't stop. People just don't need to rush to feel important." There was a pause, the kind that hangs in the air like dust after a slam. Celine cleared her throat. "Anyway, we were thinking of bringing Dad down to Boston sometime. Just for a weekend. Show him the city a bit." Dad's eyes narrowed. "I don't need the city." Damien grinned. "Come on, Richard. Everyone should see a skyline before they die." Silence. Celine stirred her green beans. "It's just there's so much he hasn't seen. Museums, restaurants, theater. I've seen enough," Dad said. The roast sat half-eaten on our plates. The sweet tea sweated in its pitcher. Outside, the wind knocked gently against the window like it was trying to rescue us from the conversation. When dessert came, pecan pie made the old way with dark corn syrup and toasted crust. Damien passed. "No thanks. My trainer would faint." Celine took a sliver and didn't touch it. "Do you still make everything from scratch?" "Just about," I said. "God," she sighed. "How do you even find the time?" I looked at her. "We make time, when it matters." Damien checked his watch. "Speaking of, we have to be up early. That winery books out months in advance." They left 15 minutes later with polite hugs and promises to plan something again soon. The door clicked shut behind them, and I felt the house breathe again. Dad stood in the kitchen staring at the leftover pie. His shoulders slumped slightly. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, softly, they talked about the world like it was something to own. I just wanted them to see where they came from. I washed the dishes while he dried. No one spoke. Later that night, after the house went quiet, I found a note Celine had left behind on the hallway table. "Thanks for dinner." So sweet. "Love, S." There was no mention of Dad. Nothing about the food, nothing about home, just sweet. Like the tea Damien couldn't finish, like something you taste then push aside. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and polished wood like permanence. I sat in the stiff leather chair, my palms pressed flat against the folder in my lap. Celine had arrived 5 minutes late, dressed in a navy wool coat and boots that clicked sharply across the floor. She didn't look at me as she took the seat beside mine, pulling her phone from her handbag and silencing it with a flick of her thumb. "Let's get started," said Mr. Harlan, the estate attorney. He was in his 60s, gray-haired with tortoise-shell glasses that magnified his eyes slightly. He shuffled a few papers, cleared his throat, and looked up at us with the solemnity of someone who'd done this too many times before. "First, let me say how sorry I am for your loss. Your father, Mr. Richard Maris, was a client of this office for many years. He cared deeply about his family, and he was meticulous in ensuring his wishes were clear." Celine crossed one leg over the other and offered a tight, practiced smile. I just nodded. Mr. Harlan continued sliding a thick document from his folder. "The estate is fairly straightforward. Most of your father's financial accounts have already been designated retirement funds, savings, modest investments. But the matter of the house and land requires your attention." He placed a crisp, cream-colored sheet between us. "Per the terms of this will the Maris home and its surrounding 2 acres are to be jointly inherited by both daughters, Eloan Maris and Selena Maris-Voss." Celine exhaled softly, and I caught the faint trace of satisfaction in her posture. She glanced at me, then back at Mr. Harlan. "Joint ownership. Makes sense," but he added his tone. "Shifting, there is a clause. One your father added 6 months ago." I felt it before he read it, that small tightening in my chest. A premonition dressed as memory. He cleared his throat again and began. "Ownership is conditional on presence. If one heir is found to have been willfully absent during the testator's critical illness and final period of care, full property rights revert to the present heir, thereby granting sole ownership." Selene blinked. "Wait, what?" Harlan looked up, even-voiced. "Your father made it clear this wasn't a symbolic clause. It is legally binding. Medical records, witness statements, and dated visitor logs from the care facility are already on file." Celine sat straighter, her tone suddenly clipped. "Are you saying I don't qualify? That's ridiculous. I was here last year. We had dinner. That was over 12 months ago." I said, my voice quiet but steady. She turned sharply toward me. "I didn't know he was dying, Elle. No one told me it was that serious." "You got the same call I did," I replied, still calm. "You said maybe next month?" Mr. Harlan interjected gently. "Your father noted the contact attempts. There were 3 calls logged in his medical file, 2 voicemails from Eloan, a written letter." He waited. Celine scoffed and leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "So that's it. I get punished because I didn't sit bedside in some drafty hospital for weeks. That's not fair. I live out of state, I have a husband, a job, and I had Dad." I said, my voice rising just slightly. "I had him when he couldn't hold a spoon, when he forgot the date, when he thought I was Mom and apologized for something from 30 years ago." Celine stared at me, jaw tight. Her makeup was perfect, neutral tones, carefully drawn brows, but her expression cracked for a second, and behind it, I saw something raw, something cornered. "I didn't abandon him," she said. I didn't think it would happen that fast." "It didn't," I said. "You just weren't here to see it." Silence. Mr. Harlan waited a beat before he continued, placing a final document in front of me. "This is the affidavit confirming your full ownership, Eloan. Should you choose to sell, maintain, or subdivide the property, that will be at your sole discretion. Celine, you are entitled to your share of any remaining personal effects not expressly distributed in the will." Celine stood abruptly. "This is absurd. Damien will have questions, legal ones." Harlan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I kept my gaze on the table. She gathered her purse, her voice low and sharp. "Enjoy your pine trees and your rotting porch swing, Elle. Hope it brings you joy." Then she was gone, just like always. The door closed behind her with a soft final click. Harlan began collecting the papers, but I stayed seated, my fingertips resting lightly on the affidavit. The words blurred for a moment, not from tears, there weren't any left, but from the weight of what they meant. Dad had known. Not just that she wouldn't come, but that I would. That I always had. He didn't write that clause to punish her. He wrote it to protect something. Maybe not the land or even the house, maybe just the memory of someone showing up when it mattered. I stood slowly and took the folder in my hand. Outside, the trees were nearly bare. The wind carried leaves across the sidewalk like they were trying to go somewhere. But I knew better. Some things stay. Some things choose to. The message came in just before sunrise. My phone buzzed against the side table, its screen casting a pale glow across the dark room. I didn't check it right away. I already knew who it was from, and I already knew what it would say. Eventually, I rolled over and opened it. We can't come. Damien's schedule is full. No punctuation, no apology, just 10 words to cover the absence of a goodbye. Dad had slipped further the night before. The hospice nurse, Monica, a gentle woman with gray-streaked curls and a voice like a lullaby, had warned me to expect changes. His pulse was slower, his breath thinner. "He's holding on," she'd said softly. "But it won't be long." Now I sat beside his bed, fingers resting lightly on the edge of his blanket. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt suspended in time. Outside, the wind stirred the last of the autumn leaves across the yard, tapping softly against the window like someone trying to get in. He was still breathing barely. Each inhale was shallow and dry, each exhale like the wind itself had to help push it out. His eyes didn't open anymore, but his brow furrowed now and then, as if his mind still stirred behind the closed lids, reaching for something or someone he hadn't yet found. I held his hand rough and cool in mine. His carpenter's hands had always been a kind of map to me, calloused, strong, marked with the story of a lifetime. The thumb that once smoothed the edge of a birdhouse now twitched faintly beneath my grip. Without thinking, I began to hum. It was her song, Mom's favorite, a lullaby from some Appalachian hymn book I never learned the name of. She used to hum it while folding laundry or while we drove home from the county fair with sugar stuck to our fingers. I hadn't sung it in years, but somehow the melody lived in me. As the notes filled the space between us, his hand flexed slightly. I kept going. "He waits for you," Monica whispered from the doorway. She didn't come in, just lingered a moment with a soft smile. "He knows you're here." I nodded but couldn't speak. The hours passed like mist, formless and slow. I read the same page of a novel 3 times without absorbing a word. At one point, I poured him a spoonful of water even though he couldn't swallow anymore. It was something to do, something that made the silence feel useful. Celine didn't call. I thought she might. Some part of me held out hope that she'd send a second message, a voice memo something. That she'd say, put the phone to his ear, that she'd say goodbye. But the phone stayed quiet. Her silence stretched longer than any prayer. I looked at our father's face, still sunken, yet somehow peaceful. I thought about the Christmas we spent on the porch drinking hot cocoa while he told stories about the neighbor's runaway pig, about the time he drove through a snowstorm just to get me new brushes for a school art show, about how when Mom died, he sat on the porch swing every night for a year, not speaking, just rocking, listening to the crickets. He was a quiet man, but when he showed up, it counted. I sang the second verse of Mom's song, and as I did, I felt something loosen inside me. A knot I didn't even know I'd been carrying. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I placed his hand gently back on the blanket, stood, and walked to the window. The sun was coming up, soft orange filtering through the pines. The kind of morning he loved, and I thought, let her go. Let Selene chase gallery openings and cocktail fundraisers. Let Damien pretend we were an inconvenience in his world of curated prestige. Let them miss this. Because this quiet, this room, this last breath shared between a father and his daughter was sacred. I didn't need them here to make it real. I was already enough. 3 days after the funeral, the house still smelled like lilies and lemon furniture polish. I'd left most of the sympathy cards in a neat stack on the kitchen counter, unopened. They all said the same thing anyway. He was a good man, he'll be missed. You were lucky to have him. I was, but luck didn't make it easier to breathe. The afternoon light came in, slanted through the side window as I stepped into the garage. Dust floated in the air, soft and slow like snow. His workbench sat just where he'd left it, against the back wall beneath a row of neatly hung tools. Everything was in order. Hammers by size, screwdrivers with labels on the handles. A mason jar full of nails sat beside a folded shop towel, faded red and stained with old varnish. I ran my fingers along the top of the bench, then opened the first drawer, extra sandpaper. Carpenter's pencils worn down to nubs. The second held a small tin box of washers and cotter pins. The third was empty except for a hand-carved ruler and a pair of safety goggles that hadn't been used in years. But the fourth drawer, bottom right, was locked. I froze. I hadn't remembered this one having a lock. I tugged at the handle gently, then firmer. It rattled, but didn't budge. I crouched down, staring at the keyhole, and for a moment I imagined asking him for the key. I could almost hear his voice from the porch. "You don't open a drawer until you're ready for what's inside, low." I stood up, walked into the house, and searched his nightstand. Third drawer down, where he always kept batteries, his reading glasses, and small things that might be useful one day, was a tiny brass key taped beneath a folded church bulletin. I brought it back out to the garage, slid it into the lock, and turned. The drawer creaked open. Inside were layers. A small bundle of receipts, mostly for hardware store runs and lumber dated over the past 2 years. Beneath that, an envelope stuffed with folded county maps. I opened one. It was marked in pencil along a winding back road I didn't recognize, ending at a star just past a river bend. Then came letters, dozens of them. Some from me, old birthday cards I'd written when I was 10, 11, 16. A few were from Mom, her handwriting, unmistakable, soft, round, slightly leaning to the right. A few were addressed to Celine. None looked opened. At the bottom of the drawer, beneath the maps and the paper, lay a single piece of wood thin, almost like a tile. Carved into it in his firm, careful hand were 4 words. Only one stayed. R.M. My throat tightened. I read it again as if the meaning might shift on a second pass, but it didn't. It wasn't angry, it wasn't spiteful, just final, observant. Only one stayed. I sat back on the concrete floor, knees pulled in, and let the quiet fill in around me. He'd never said it aloud. He never would have. But he had kept this drawer of truths, private memories, and quiet decisions, just for me, for later. I reached into the drawer one last time and felt something small and metal clink against my palm. A key, not for the house. This one was longer brass and marked with the name of a local credit union, a deposit box. I held it in my hand for a long moment, the weight of it pressing into my skin. It didn't feel like a gift, it felt like a door, one that he expected me to open when I was ready. I wasn't sure if I was ready now, but I would go anyway. The drawer clicked shut behind me. I left the key where it belonged. The bank lobby smelled like new carpet and over-chlorinated air. I stood at the service desk with the key clutched in my hand, heart ticking faster than I wanted it to. The teller, a young woman named Kara, according to her nameplate, glanced down at the key and then up at me with practiced politeness. "Box number 137. I said my voice a little too soft. It belonged to Richard Maris. She nodded, typed something into her screen, and asked for my ID. I handed it over without thinking. A few quiet seconds passed, filled only by the faint hiss of air conditioning and the scratch of her nails on the keyboard. Then she looked up and smiled with a kind of understanding that surprised me. "Right this way." The vault was colder than the lobby, the kind of cold that settled in your bones, not unfriendly, just impersonal. Kara turned the key and pulled the box out, laying it gently on a small table in the viewing room. "Take your time," she said, then closed the door behind her. I sat down and stared at the metal box for a moment. It was nothing special to look at, just a standard silver rectangle with rounded corners and a quiet weight to it. But I felt like it might change everything. I opened the lid. Inside was a manila envelope thick with documents, and beneath it a smaller blue one with my name written in elegant looping cursive. Ilawin. My grandmother's handwriting. Not my mother's. Hers had been messier, more fluid. But Grandma Ruth had written letters like they were art. I hadn't seen that script in over a decade. I set the blue envelope aside and opened the manila one first. Legal documents. A trust fund agreement. I flipped through the pages, blinking as the numbers came into focus. $860,000. I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't a mistake. The trust had been opened 23 years ago, just after I was born, seeded with a significant amount by Ruth Ann Maris and invested wisely over time. It had grown quietly, untouched. My name was listed as sole beneficiary. There was no mention of Celine. At the bottom was a note in small print, handwritten in blue ink. "Richard, please keep this between us." You know why. RAM. I stared at that line for a long time. I could almost hear their voices late at night over coffee in the kitchen, speaking in the careful way people do when they love the same children but see them through different lenses. I opened the blue envelope. It held one sheet of paper folded neatly in thirds, and it smelled faintly of cedar and lavender like the sachets Grandma used to keep in her dresser drawers. Her handwriting flowed like ribbon across the page. "My dearest Eloan, if you're reading this, then the time has come for you to know what I've always hoped you would use with grace, not grief. This money is not a reward. It is not a prize for good behavior or punishment for your sister's choices. It's a gift, a tool, a seed. Your mother and I disagreed about many things, but we agreed on this: you carry things others don't. The quiet burdens, the responsibilities no one notices but always expects. You've never asked for anything, and that's precisely why I wanted something to be waiting for you. Use it to protect what matters, not to prove your worth. You've always had that. And Eloan, don't let silence keep you from planting something new. With all my love, Grandma Ruth." I folded the letter slowly, holding it like something sacred. Not because of the money, though the weight of it pressed against my chest like a tide I hadn't seen coming, but because of what it meant. Someone had seen me. Not for what I could give or how well I could hold everything together, but simply for who I was. That quiet recognition hit harder than any check ever could. I sat there for a long time, staring down at the documents, the ink, the signature lines, and legal language that somehow felt deeply personal. Dad had kept this from me not out of malice, but protection. I could see it now, his fear of what money might do to a family, already split along quiet fractures. He'd seen what ambition and resentment had done to Celine. Maybe he thought if he told me it would shift something in me too. Maybe he was wrong, maybe he wasn't. But now I knew, and I couldn't unknow it. I stood, gathered the documents, and returned the box to the vault. Kara didn't ask questions when I handed it back. She just nodded and told me to take care. I stepped out into the crisp air, letter in hand, eyes lifted toward the late afternoon sky. Protect what matters. I thought of the house, the land, the clause in the will. I thought of Celine and what she'd walked away from. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. The letter came in a crisp, white envelope embossed with the gold foil seal of a Boston law firm whose name stretched across the top in all capital letters: Voss, Keller, and Winston, LLP. It had that polished weight to it, the kind of paper you didn't throw out even when you wanted to. I sat at the kitchen table with it in my hands, the late morning sun catching the slight shimmer in the watermark. My coffee had gone cold. The silence of the house felt heavier now, more watchful. I opened it slowly. It was from an associate at the firm, someone named J. Kendall Sloan, speaking on behalf of Celine Voss. The language was polite but sharp, all respectfully requesting and joint ownership considerations. The bottom line was this: Celine wanted to sell the property, all of it. They proposed a buyout clause appraised the home and land at a generous $1.1 million and offered Eloan half of that minus legal and administrative fees. The final number after deductions was barely more than what a rundown condo cost in Portland. And the kicker: the client's intention, it read, is to develop the land into a high-end vacation retreat. Luxury cabins, boutique experience, enhanced market value for the town. I stared at the phrase luxury cabins as if reading it hard enough would make it disappear. The same land where Dad taught us to whittle sticks into arrows, where we watched fox kits tumble out from the tree line every spring, where our mother planted wild daffodils in long, crooked rows. Boutique experience, my ass. My stomach turned. I set the letter down, stood up, and paced the room, fists clenched. She hadn't even come to the funeral, hadn't called, And now she wanted to gut the heart of this place and turn it into a corporate weekend for hedge fund managers. No, I wasn't letting her erase what mattered. The next day I drove into town. A friend from the school board recommended a small law office just off the square 3 floors of creaky wood floors and mismatched chairs. I didn't expect much, just someone to tell me if I even had a chance. The front desk was empty when I walked in, but a voice called out from the back, warm and brisk. "I'll be right with you, just 1 second." A woman appeared from behind a cracked glass door, wiping ink off her palms with a paper towel. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s hair and a loose braid, wearing jeans and a navy blazer that had clearly been through a few cases already. "You must be Elowen Maris," she said, smiling with a kind of familiarity I didn't quite understand yet. I blinked. "How did you—" "I saw the obituary and the last name." "I knew your dad," she said. "He rebuilt my grandmother's porch for free, didn't even charge for materials. Said she reminded him of someone." I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my mouth. "That sounds like him." "I'm Alina Ward," she said, reaching out her hand. "And if you're here because of the letter from Voss Keller, you're not the first." I handed her the envelope. "They want me to sell." She scanned the document quickly, eyes narrowing. "Of course they do. This language is designed to push you into folding. But that clause in your father's will, that's your anchor." She gestured for me to sit down, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began scribbling. "If you stayed through his illness and your sister was demonstrably absent, we've got precedent. Testamentary intent is strong here." I nodded slowly. "I don't have much money for a lawyer. I'm not charging you," she interrupted gently. "Not for this." My eyes widened. "But why? Because your father once showed up at my grandma's after a storm, cleared a tree from her steps, and refused a dime. He told me, 'Community's not something you bill for.'" I swallowed the lump in my throat. Alina leaned forward, expression sharpening. "You want to keep the land? I want to protect it," I said. "Then let's do that." She made a copy of the letter, scanned it for her records, and handed me back the original. "We'll respond within the week. And Elowen, yeah. They may have a firm with 4 names, but I've got the story that matters. Let's make sure they don't rewrite it." As I stepped back into the sunlight, the letter still folded in my purse, I felt something shift. It wasn't just about holding on anymore. It was about standing up. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun. I was just scrolling through a public zoning calendar on the county's website when I found an agenda item marked Proposal Rezoning Parcel, 46A. Agricultural to commercial lodging use. My heart stopped mid-beat. I clicked through and saw the map. It was ours, our land. The backyard where Mom once hung laundry from the wooden line, the slope where Dad and I buried our dog Marlowe beneath a smooth stone. All of it marked for development review in 10 days. I printed the agenda and stared at it while the printer hummed. The sponsor was Voss Development Group. Not just Voss, as in Damien Voss, but a full LLC tied to luxury real estate deals in the Berkshires and parts of Vermont. This wasn't just Celine's pet project. It was a business move. Calculated, cold. And they thought I wouldn't fight. I should have seen it coming. The lawyer letter was just the start. But this was execution. That night, unable to sleep, I pulled out the file Alina had helped me assemble. Will's land surveys the old deed with Dad's worn signature. I needed something more, something human. If they wanted to bulldoze history, I had to show that history had weight. I dug through drawers, opened old boxes in the attic, and found what I hadn't realized I was looking for: photos. Yellowing Polaroids and matte finish prints, some curled at the edges. There was one of Dad, shirtless in the summer heat, building the fence with sunburnt shoulders and a pencil behind his ear. One of Mom kneeling in the dirt, planting a sapling with her bare hands, my tiny palm resting against the roots. And another, taken by someone I didn't remember, of a long folding table set under the maple trees. Neighbors gathered with Tupperware and lemonade pitchers, plates piled high with potluck food. The land hadn't just been used, it had been lived in. Loved. I started a binder. At the front I placed the letter from Grandma Ruth, followed by a printout of the trust documents and copies of the will. But after that, I slid in the photographs, each one with a handwritten caption, Dad building the western fence. 1997, Community Potluck, July 2002. Over 40 attendees. Planting the memorial maple for Mom, October 2005. This wasn't just evidence, it was story, and story, Dad always said, was harder to erase than numbers. 2 days later, Alina called me unexpectedly. "I think you should see this," she said, voice tight. "Check your email." I opened the message, and there it was, an internal thread from Voss Development. Someone had leaked it. Probably a junior staffer with a conscience. The email chain included Damien, a project manager named Corinne, and someone listed only as Z Lane. It wasn't polite. "Once rezoned, we can clear the old structures. Her sister won't fight local teachers, don't exactly have the budget for litigation. Let the letters shake her a little, then we'll close before Q4. There it was. In black and white. Their assumption, their arrogance. Alina's voice crackled through the speaker. This gives us leverage. Not legal yet, but moral and political. If we go public... Not yet, I said. My voice surprised even me. Calm, steady. You want to wait? I want to build the case. Let them keep assuming. 10 days is enough to show this town what the land really is. She was quiet for a moment. Then, okay, but be careful. Once they catch wind, you're organizing, they'll push harder. That night, I visited the old shed where Dad kept his tools. The air smelled of sawdust and machine oil. I found a cedar crate filled with blueprints, hand-drawn sketches of improvements. He'd planned a rainwater collection system, a greenhouse. He never got to build a playground for the neighbor kids. Dreams in graphite and faded grid lines. I added those too. In the mornings before school, I scanned each document. In the evenings, I visited neighbors who had attended the potlucks or borrowed Dad's tools or helped paint the barn one summer. I asked for their stories. They gave them freely, some with tears, some with laughter. I recorded it all. What I was building wasn't a legal brief, it was a testimony, and I knew one thing for sure, they were wrong. I wasn't the sister who'd stay quiet. I was the one who remembered. The community hall smelled faintly of old wood and powdered coffee creamer. Folding chairs lined the back of the room, most already filled town council members in the front. Long-time residents scattered throughout, a few teenagers with phones in hand, pretending not to listen. The zoning review sign hung on the corkboard at the side of the stage. Parcel 46A, proposed rezone agricultural to commercial lodging. I sat in the second row binder, clutched in my lap, heart pounding with quiet rhythm. My fingers ran the seam of the leather edge again and again. Alina sat beside me, heels crossed at the ankle papers, organized in a flat manila folder, calm as a lake in winter. Then I saw her. Celine walked in like she hadn't grown up in this town, like she hadn't once danced barefoot on the back porch or begged Dad for cinnamon toast after midnight. Her hair was twisted into a low, sleek bun. A navy blazer hugged her frame, the kind that looked tailored by someone who knew which fabric made money look elegant. Damien wasn't with her, but she didn't need him. She wore his presence like perfume, expensive, distant, overpowering. She scanned the room and stopped when her eyes met mine. A flicker, nothing more but enough to make my stomach tighten. Then the cold smile. The same one she used at that last dinner when she'd laughed at Dad's quaint home and our small-town lives. I held her stare just long enough, then turned back. The meeting began with procedural roll calls, agenda overviews, and a rapid-fire summary by a man in a brown vest about why rezoning would bring tourist capital and growth to the town. Celine stepped forward when her name was called, voice crisp and pleasant as she described the project. Eco-friendly luxury cabins, she said. Modern appeal with minimal footprint. Local job creation managed thoughtfully through Voss Development. She had charts, a glossy concept map, bullet points on projected revenue. For a moment, even I had to admit it looked polished. Then the chairperson asked, "Any counterpoints or statements before we move to board deliberation?" I rose. I didn't make a speech. I just walked to the front, slowly setting the binder down on the long folding table. I opened it and let the first image show Dad's shirt-off pencil behind his ear, nailing the fence with a teenage Celine, standing next to him holding a crooked post. The second, a photo of Mom's daffodils blooming in April. Then, neighbors at the potluck laughing beside mismatched chairs, children running barefoot. I looked at the room, not at Celine, and spoke. My name is Elowen Maris. My father was Richard Maris. Many of you knew him. He built half the decks in this town with nothing but sweat and a stubborn back. He gave his time for free because he believed land should serve people, not profit. I flipped a few pages forward, showing a letter from my grandmother Ruth and a photocopy of the trust she had started years ago. My voice didn't shake, but I could feel the air shift. This land holds memories that don't fit in spreadsheets. And I've decided, I said, breathing in to place this land, every acre, under permanent community preservation. A low murmur swept across the room. Someone clapped. Then another. Then a full wave of applause rolled through, broken only by a few stunned faces who hadn't expected anything but silence from me. I glanced at Celine. Her face was still, hands clenched at her sides, the smile gone. With the funds entrusted to me by my grandmother, I continued, this property will remain what it's always been, a home. For memory, for community, and for the legacy of those who actually showed up. The board chair blinked, shuffled his papers, then nodded. Well, I believe that changes the nature of this proposal. The vote didn't take long. The motion to rezone was tabled indefinitely. Celine didn't say a word as she packed her briefcase. She passed me on her way out, heels clicking like judgment, but she didn't meet my eyes. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. I didn't beat her in court. I didn't humiliate her in front of her peers. I simply told the truth about roots, about presence, about a quiet man who built more than walls. He built a place worth protecting. As the meeting ended, neighbors came up to shake my hand, hug me, share memories of Dad. One older man, Mr. Beale, from 3 houses down, choked up as he pressed a photo into my hand, a picture of my father helping him build a treehouse in '95. Alina stood beside me quietly, then leaned in and whispered, "You didn't just stand up for your father, Elowen. You stood up for every quiet person who ever stayed behind to hold things together." I didn't answer. I just nodded, eyes stinging. Outside, dusk had started to fall. The wind was soft, laced with salt from the bay. And for the first time in a long while, the land felt like it had exhaled. So did I. The evening air was brisk, the kind that made your breath visible but didn't yet bite your skin. The parking lot lights flickered on overhead, casting soft pools of amber across cracked pavement. Most of the crowd had already driven off their engines, fading into the rhythm of early night. I stood beneath the edge of the community hall roof binder, still tucked under my arm, when I saw them waiting, Celine and Damien parked in a gleaming black SUV, windows dark as ink. They stepped out together. Damien moved first, jaw, tight hands buried in the pockets of a sleek charcoal coat. Celine followed her heels slower this time, more uncertain on the gravel. Her expression wasn't angry, not exactly. It was more like confusion, like someone who had played every card in a familiar game and suddenly didn't recognize the rules anymore. Damien reached me first. "You'll regret this," he said, low but pointed. "You just killed a multi-million-dollar opportunity. Do you even understand what you gave up?" I looked at him. At the watch gleaming on his wrist, the way his tie was still perfectly knotted even after nightfall. The kind of man who measured people by zip code and net return. "I didn't kill a deal," I said. "I saved a promise." He gave a cold laugh. "You saved sentiment. That doesn't build equity." I didn't bother replying. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself, to his ego, to the world that told him everything had a price tag and anyone without one was irrelevant. He stepped aside, but not before offering one last parting shot. "You could have had something, you know. A slice. Instead, you walked away with nothing." That's where he was wrong, but I let the silence answer for me. Then Celine moved forward. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stood there, her eyes scanning my face like she was searching for something she'd lost without realizing it. "I always wondered why he favored you," she said finally, almost under her breath. "You were so quiet, so small, but I see it now." My pulse thudded. "He didn't have favorites, Celine." She looked away, bitter smile tugging at the edge of her mouth. "You always wanted to be the favorite." No, I said, the words rising from somewhere steady and tired and true. I just stayed. That landed. She flinched barely, but it was there. The streetlight above us flickered again, casting her in and out of gold shadow. I thought she might say more. I almost wanted her to some half-apology, some threadbare acknowledgement. But Selena had never been good at unfinished things. She only knew how to leave. She turned and walked back to the car. Damien didn't wait. The engine revved before she even closed the door. I stood still as they pulled out of the lot and disappeared down the road, their taillights shrinking until they became nothing. Behind me, the hall had gone quiet, just a few chairs left to stack a few papers rustling from the breeze someone let in. I let my shoulders fall. Not from exhaustion, but release. This wasn't about winning. It never had been. It was about standing when it counted, even if no one saw. Especially then. I walked the rest of the way home, past the bakery where Dad used to buy 2 cinnamon rolls on Friday mornings, past the corner where Celine once got her bike tire stuck and he'd carried her the last 4 blocks, past the post office where I'd mailed my application to art school and where he'd hugged me, quietly proud. At home, I slipped off my shoes by the door and placed the binder on the dining table right where Dad used to sit with his morning paper. The air smelled of pine and old cedar. I poured a glass of water and stood in the middle of the kitchen, letting the quiet settle around me. He was gone, but the legacy that stayed, so did I. Spring came slowly that year, with cautious green pushing through the frost like it was testing whether it was safe to grow. I found myself walking more often without planning to, without needing a destination. The gravel path that once led to our back fence had been widened, slightly lined with native wildflowers, and now carried a modest wooden sign at the entrance, the Maris Heritage Grove. It was quiet, but not empty. Children's voices echoed faintly through the trees. Laughing, calling the kind of noise that softened the air instead of breaking it. The maple trees Dad planted decades ago had held their ground thick and strong, their branches casting dappled shadows over a winding footpath. I followed it without rush binder free, no more evidence to carry. On the left stood a curved bench made of raw cedar, the grain still visible, the seat slightly uneven on purpose. Dad used to say wood was never meant to be perfect. He had carved into it the words, sit. Stay a while. I ran my fingers across the grooves, the lettering worn but steady. I could still hear his voice, the day he mounted that first one, telling me, "We build places, not just things." Up ahead, near the center of the grove, where the clearing opened to sunlight, a small gathering space had been built, just stone and timber, a few handmade benches, and a chalkboard for kids to draw on. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't meant to be. It was a place for memory to live without becoming a museum. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw a woman, early 30s, maybe sitting on one of the benches with a stroller beside her, and a toddler chasing dandelions nearby. She looked up as I approached, offered a warm, surprised smile. "Are you Alawan?" I nodded, a little caught off guard. "Yes." She stood quickly, brushing her hands on her jeans. "I just wanted to thank you. For this. For all of it." I glanced around the space. It wasn't just me, it was my father and the town. She shook her head gently. "Maybe. But you're the one who kept it. You could have sold it off like people do, but you didn't. My son." She turned, slightly motioning to the boy tumbling through grass. "He plays here almost every day. You know what he calls it? The magic trees." I smiled at that. Something tightened in my chest and softened at the same time. "My husband's in the service," she added. "Gone a lot. This place gives us something steady. It matters." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching her son pretend to battle invisible dragons with a stick and a red baseball cap sliding down his head. "Would your father have liked it?" she asked quietly. I nodded. He'd never admit it out loud, but yes, he'd sit here and say nothing, and that would be his way of saying everything. She smiled and touched the back of the bench gently. "Well, thank you." As she gathered her things and headed off down the path, I stayed behind, sitting on the bench under the old sugar maple. I looked out across the grove, not just as a daughter now, but as a keeper. There were no lawsuits left, no angry emails, no press statements or meetings, just trees, wind, laughter in the distance. The kind of legacy you can walk through. And one day I hoped others would build their own stories here too quietly, gently, without needing to prove a thing. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The paintbrush moved in slow, steady strokes across the fence rail where time had worn the stain to a soft gray. I used the same hue my father once mixed by hand walnut and cedar with just a touch of red ochre. He used to say color had memory, and when I dipped the brush, I believed him. Behind me, the quiet hum of children's voices rose and fell like birdsong. My weekend art class had grown over the months, 8 kids now sprawled across picnic blankets beneath the grove's oldest oak-dabbing watercolor skies and bold stick-figure trees on thick sketch paper. The smell of tempera paint and wet grass filled the air. I set the brush down and turned just in time to see a little girl with a smudge of green on her cheek approach me. She couldn't have been more than 7, with a crooked ponytail and fierce, curious eyes. She pointed to the bench, to the path, to the wide clearing behind us. "Did your dad build all this?" I crouched beside her, wiping my hands on my apron. "He built what mattered," I said. She nodded solemnly, like she understood even if she didn't yet know how much that meant. The wind rustled the oak leaves above, and I looked up through the canopy sunlight, catching in the shifting green. From where we stood, the entire grove stretched out in soft layers, benches, garden beds, footpaths curving through memory. I walked her back to the others kneeling beside a boy painting a crooked barn with yellow windows. He grinned when I praised his work cheeks flushed with pride. I watched them, all these loud, messy, wonderful kids, scatter color across the paper with abandon. They didn't know this place used to be quiet, that it had almost disappeared. But they would know it now, they would remember it as theirs. And when class ended, I rolled up sleeves sticky with paint and walked the long path home past the old tool shed, past the tree Dad once carved our names into. The air was warm the way it only gets in the first full weeks of summer. No court battles, no bitter words, no regret, just roots and things built to last. Some people leave money, some leave stories. Dad left both. But more than that, he left a place where people could grow. And I stayed. Not because I had to, because I chose to. Because sometimes what stays is what matters most. Outline chapter main character. Eloan Maris, 29 years old, is an art teacher at a small public school in coastal Maine. The youngest daughter in the family, she leads a quiet, grounded life, soft-spoken, observant, and deeply loyal. While others moved on or drifted away, Eloan stayed. She remained close to her father, Richard Maris, a retired carpenter known throughout their town for both his craftsmanship and quiet integrity.